Prabhupada Maharaj ki,
Jai.
Nam Acharya Shri Haridas Thakur ki,
Jai.
Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki, Prem se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki,
Jai.
Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shyama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Gauram ki,
Jai.
Shri Mayapur Vrindavan Dham ki,
Jai.
Shri Maya Munamaya ki,
Jai.
Bhakti Devi Tulasi Devi ki,
Jai.
Hari Naam Sankirtan Yajna ki,
Jai.
all glories to His Emperor,
Jai.
all glories to His Emperor. Alle Ehre sei dem gesamten Gott geweiht. Und größte Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga, all größte Wie ist die Deutsch? Englisch? Englisch Programm, Englisch. So. Shri Guru Vandana, the lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain pure devotional service. I bow down to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Attachment to his lotus feet is the perfection that fulfills all desires. He opens my heart and eyes and infuses my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him ecstatic prema emanates. By him
Yashodanandana Brajajanandana Yashodanandana Brajajanandana Rama Rama Hare No, thank you. Hare Krishna and welcome to Srimad Bhagavatam class. Continue the 4th canto, chapter 23, entitled Maharaj Prithu's Going Back Home. Your text 20. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Ativa Bhartur Vrata Dharma Nishtaya Shushrushaya Charsha Deha Yatraya Navindatartim Parikarshitapi Sa that's the whole verse. Priyashkaras Parshanamana Nivriti Ativa Bhartu Vrata Dharma Nishtaya Ativa Bhartur Vrata Dharma Nishtaya Shushrushaya Charsha Deha Yatraya Shushrushaya Charsha Deha Yatraya Navinda Dhartim Parikarshita Pisa Navinda Dhartim Parikarshita Pisa Preyaskaras Parshanamana Nivriti Preyaskaras Parshanamana Nivriti Ativa Bhartu Vrata Dharma Nishtaya Shushrushaya Charsha Deha Yatraya Navinda Dhartim Parikarshita Pisa Preyaskaras Parshanamana Nivriti
Ativa Bhartur Vrata Dharma Nishtaya Shushrushaya Charsha Deha Yatraya Navinda Tartim Parikarshita Pisa Preyaskaras Parshanamana Nivriti
Ativa Bhartur Vrata Dharma Nishtaya Shushrushaya Charsha Deha Yatraya
Shushrushaya Shashadihayatraya
Navindatartim parikarshita pisa
Navindatartim parikarshita pisa
Preyaskarasparshanamana nirvriti
Preyaskarasparshanamana nirvriti. Vaishnavis.
Ativa Bhartu Vratadharma Nishtaya
Ativa Bhartu Vratadharma Nishtaya
Shrushaya Chashadha Yatraya
Shushrushaya Chashadihayatraya
Navindatartim Parikarshitapisa
Navindatartim Parikarshitapisa Preyaskarasparshanamana nirvriti. Ativa, very much. Bhartu, of the husband. Vratadharma, vow to serve him. Nishtaya, by determination. Shushrushaya, by serving. Cha, also. Arsha, like the great saintly sages. Deha, body. Yatraya, living condition. Na, did not. Avindata, perceive. Artim, any difficulty. Parikarshita, api, although transformed, to become lean and thin. Sa, she. Preyakara, very pleasing. Sparshana, touching. Mana, engaged. Nivriti, pleasure. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Although she was not accustomed to such difficulties, Queen Archie followed her husband in the regulative principles of living in the forest like great sages. She lay down on the ground and ate only fruits, flowers and leaves, and because she was not fit for these activities, she became frail and thin. Yet because of the pleasure she derived in serving her husband, she did not feel any difficulties. Purport. The words Bhartu Vrata Dharma Nishtaya indicate that a woman's duty or religious principle is to serve her husband in all conditions. In Vedic civilization, a man is taught from the beginning of his life to become a brahmachari, then an ideal grihastha, then vanaprastha, then sannyasi. And the wife is taught just to follow the husband strictly in all conditions of life. After the period of brahmacharya, a man accepts a householder's life, and the woman is also taught by her parents to be a chaste wife. Thus, when a girl and boy are united, both are trained for a life dedicated to a higher purpose. The boy is trained to execute his duty in accordance with the higher purpose of life, and the girl is trained to follow him. The chaste wife's duty is to keep her husband pleased in household life in all respects, and when the husband retires from family life, she is to go to the forest and adopt the life of vanaprastha, or vanavasi. At that time, the wife is to follow her husband and take care of him just as she took care of him in household life. But when the husband takes the renounced order of life, namely sannyas, the wife is to return home and become a saintly woman, setting an example for her children and daughters-in-law and showing them how to live a life of austerity. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyas, his wife, Vishnu Priya Devi, although only 16 years old, also took the vow of austerity due to her husband's leaving home. She chanted her beads, and after finishing one round, she collected 1 grain of rice. In this way, as many rounds as she chanted, she would receive the same number of rice grains, and then cook them and so take prasad. This is called austerity. Even today in India, widows or women whose husbands have taken sannyas follow the principles of austerity, even though they live with their children. Prithu Maharaj's wife, Archie, was steadily determined to execute the duty of a wife, and while her husband was in the forest, she followed him in eating only fruits and leaves and lying down on the ground. Since a woman's body is considerably more delicate than a man's, Queen Archie became very frail and thin, parikarshita. When one engages in austerities, his body generally becomes lean and thin. Becoming fat is not a very good qualification in spiritual life, because a person who is engaged in spiritual life must reduce the comforts of the body, namely eating, sleeping, and mating to a minimum. Although Queen Archie became very thin from living in the forest, according to regulative principles, she was not unhappy, for she was enjoying the honor of serving her great husband. Om Ajnana-timirandasya Gananjana-shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Garamayam Dadati Svavrantikam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta-vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vagishayasya Vadhane Lakshmiryasya Chavakshasi Yasya Te Hridaye Samvit Tam Narasimham Maham Bhaje Pralada Hridayaladam Bhakta Vitya Vidaram Sharatinduruchim Vande Parindra Vandanam Harim. The text again. Although she was not accustomed to such difficulties, Queen Archie followed her husband in the regulative principles of living in the forest like great sages. She lay down on the ground and ate only fruits, flowers, and leaves. And because she was not fit for these activities, she became frail and thin. Yet because of the pleasure she derived in serving her husband, she did not feel any difficulties. So yesterday, Vrindavan Chandra Prabhu already opened up the topic with the previous verse, which is very similar to this one. It's just like an extension. And this is, I would address two topics that are in this verse, and one is the so-called Sri Dharma, the occupational duty of a woman according to the Vedic civilization, and the principle of austerity, and the doability, so to say, of austerities in our time and age. Yesterday, also, Vrindavan Chandra Prabhu already shared quite a few interesting quotes, and also Krishna Prabhu Prabhu shared some quotes in regards to the relationships between men and women in the Vedic conception. And yeah, that is a controversy following, like as it is described here, wife follows husband, is attached to a lot of reservations and resistance or resentment even, because it seems to indicate oppression and lack of freedom, or like, how to say, decrease of freedom of the women in particular. Also the Sri Dharma is mentioned over many places. Also if you just type it in the Veda-based searches and so on, or like the Vani quotes, then you find many statements where it is described that there are like a few comparisons given. It said the wife should see the husband as God, the disciple should see the guru as God, and the Shudra should see the master as God. So it's always the principle, one is, so to say, the servant and looks up to the master, like for leadership. And maybe even these terms already cause quite maybe resentment in the modern mind, because it sounds all like kind of, oh my God, I'm going to be oppressed. And here the verse says that actually Archie did not feel, or Queen Archie did not feel any difficulties because of the pleasure she derived in serving her husband. I find this is very significant. From the previous verse we heard that Queen Archie was not accustomed to any kind of tapasya in that sense. It said she lived in the palace, she would never leave the palace, or like never means practically never, but certainly she would go out sometimes. But then would start like an austerity which is like very drastic compared to what she was used to. And there's a nice quote which I unfortunately could not find anymore where exactly, but it stayed in my mind. Perhaps it's from the Hari Bhakti Vilas. And there it is mentioned that also a disciple, perhaps a brahmachari or generally a disciple, stops to feel discomfort discomfort by, for example, carrying pots of water for the guru, because in the ancient times, like not modern times, of course you had to carry water around, it was not coming out of a tap. So I also experienced this in India some years ago when I served the spiritual master I had back then, and I had to carry like this 10, 20 liter buckets of water, like at least 50 meters from the source of water to the house, and quite frequently. And yeah, if you do it frequently, it's a discomfort, particular if you're not Indian and it's summer in India, and you get to walk around with these loads. And it said it stops to be a difficulty because when the student attains or like receives transcendental knowledge or even prema, all this becomes insignificant. So it said the reward of the relationship, so to speak, is the same like you with husband and wife. On a spiritual platform, if both, Srila Prabhupada points it out in the purport, dedicate their life to a higher purpose, which means spiritual elevation, we both team up, so to speak, to go back to Godhead, instead of we both team up to give each other material enjoyment as good as possible, and if it doesn't work anymore, okay, then we go separate ways. So, and here, if this is there, if this commitment to a higher purpose is given, then also the difficulties that arise in terms of work or duty or mental difficulties, they are said to become less up to non-existent if one truly receives the rewards of spiritual practice. So then it's a service of love, not a service of duty or like need. You know, in a material nature, on a material platform, we are needy for material enjoyment, mental enjoyment, and naturally then there's a tendency to use others, not even out of evil motivation, simply out of I need something and I want to pacify my needs, so I need someone to pacify it. So even if it sounds horrible, but we use each other then, if it's about getting sense pleasure. We are in agreement, I give you sense pleasure, you give me. But at the same time it's a mutual, rather, relationship of enjoying and controlling and using, whereas the relationship principle that is highlighted in the Vedic scriptures is become a servant of each other, a servant of the spiritual needs in the first place. At the same time, of course, the dharma of a husband is to give protection in all respects, and as said here, the dharma of a woman would be to serve and follow the husband who does so, who also follows himself the spiritual principles, to serve him. Here it said in all circumstances, Srila Prabhupada writes, and this of course relates to the Varna Ashram principle of stages a man is supposed to go through. Srila Prabhupada writes about the brahmacharya, then the grihastha, vanaprastha, sannyasas, different stages. So it does not necessarily relate to whatever the husband does, the wife has to follow, because it's some interpretation that we find also nowadays that gives reason for being very critical about that concept. And yesterday also Krishna Premarupa Prabhu shared a quote, which I also would like to pick up on again. It's in the 7th canto, there are two verses, 7:11:28 and 7:11:29, that give us also a bit of the, the origin of the whole concept. Why is this relationship concept like that? And I start with 7:11:29 and go back to 28 because it makes in this moment a bit more sense. In 7:11:29 it said, "The woman who engages in the service of her husband, following strictly in the footsteps of the goddess of fortune, surely returns home back to Godhead with her devotee husband and lives very happily in the Vaikuntha planets." Here it said, "A woman should serve her husband as faithfully as the goddess of fortune. A man should be an ideal servant of the Lord, and a woman should be an ideal wife like the goddess of fortune. Then both, husband and wife will be so faithful and strong that by acting together they will return home back to Godhead without a doubt. In this regard, Srila Madhvacharya gives his opinion. A woman should think of her husband as the Supreme Lord. Similarly, a disciple should think of the spiritual master as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A Shudra should think of a Brahmana as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and a servant should think of his master as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In this way, all of them will automatically become devotees of the Lord. In other words, by thinking this way, all of them will become Krishna conscious. So the relationship example starts by actually Lakshmi Narayan itself. This is like taken as the example how man and woman relate to each other. And we see here also Maharaj Prithu and Archie, they are expansions. Maharaj Prithu is in Shaktivesha avatar, partial representation of Vishnu, and Queen Archie is a partial representation of Lakshmi Devi. And they show here their the level of commitment like man and woman can have. And before I read 28, I'd like to say a few words on how can a bond be so strong that you even in such conditions just really, let's just stick together, but you even don't feel the unpleasantries of such an austerity. Do you know anyone from the older generations, Prabhupada disciples or devotees, who do that, who go and live in a forest just like that, eat only fruits and flowers and sleep on the ground? Probably not, because no one does that nowadays. It's also not an austerity recommended for nowadays. Just think of it like here, usually we also start from India as a continent and the climate present there. There's, for a Westerner, if you're more to the south, it's always warm. It's okay to sleep outside. But if you're here, like in Europe or like more up, just imagine being winter in the forest. You will just die. You should just freeze to death. That's it. Unless you're really accustomed to like the severe austerity. I was once in Finland some years ago. There was a retreat with Kadambakananda Maharaj, and was also more in the countryside. And also we met one guy, and he was living a bit like kind of a Viking. He had also like tattoos on his face and being really, I just have a sleeping bag and I dig myself a hole in the ground and that's where I sleep. And it was, yeah, impressive. I mean, if you can do that, some people do that, live in the forest like, but just think of it, what that really means. You know, no comforts, no electricity, no warm water, no this, no that. Everything is just up to you to maintain yourself, you know, completely. What to speak of having to deal with all kinds of insects and animals and this thing and that thing. So it's a very unpleasant, actually, life if you're not willing to do it so. Because tapasya, Srila Prabhupada defines it, as yesterday it was mentioned, is to voluntarily accept inconvenience. That's the principle of tapasya. If you just go through some tapasya-like circumstances, but you actually resent or resist them, you don't get the benefit of it. Like fasting, if you consciously fast, yes, you do. But if people, so many people starve nowadays, but you cannot say, oh yeah, they fast and get spiritual benefit. They starve and they resent it and they suffer, and it's kind of burning karma for sure, but it's not the same as a conscious tapasya, where you accept it yourself, you can stop it then when the time is required and get to it. So tapasya means voluntarily conscious restraint. Otherwise it's not powerful if you don't choose it. If it's just like laid upon you. Then also, of course, yeah, karma is being burned. You struggle through, but it's different if you choose it. And Srila Prabhupada, in many lectures, he points out like how the symptoms of Kali Yuga are being described in the later cantos of the Bhagavatam, and where some symptoms are that the relationships are simply based on sex attraction, or marriages just by agreement, and so on. So the relationship, the bond that is created, it's very frail also, usually. Not with everyone. We see examples of people who have very deep, committed relationships, lifelong. But it is an increasing tendency, generally that relationships are very superficial, based on material or like physical attraction and needing from each other certain pleasures. And if this cannot be anymore maintained, people separate or divorce. So of course the relationship between those great personalities in the Bhagavatam cannot be seen like this. Srila Prabhupada points that out, that it's not based on physical attraction between man and woman. It might be there to some degree, but actually the first primary commitment is we are trained to understand our purpose in life is to attain self-realization. And from there we start relationships, friendships, marriages, and so on. Where instead of like, I need this and this and that, and therefore let me find someone who provides me with these things. So that would be the ideal starting point if we get that in our lives. Many of us didn't get that, so we have a lot of needs, material needs, so which might get quite in the way at times if you want to commit to a mutual spiritual relationship, right? Because if you truly serve each other's spiritual interests, then you have a permanent connection no matter in what condition your body is. Because the body will continue to dwindle and to become either sick or less beautiful day by day, you get older. And if your relationship is not dependent on that, then that's very good. But if a relationship is very much based on how attractive do I find you and how attractive do you find me, physically, sexually, etc., it becomes difficult at some point. You know, some people feel like, oh, I need something refreshing, a younger spouse, a younger this, a better this. So it's Prabhupada said skin deep often. Relationship is like that. So therefore it's important to agree on what is our relationship meant for. Might be also friendships. We speak of course, marriages, relationships, and to see, can we really agree on this higher purpose? Also the whole arrangement, how a Vedic marriage takes place, it's quite sophisticated, so to speak. There's, for those who are interested, Gaur Govinda Maharaj had one seminar going on, it's on YouTube, the principles of Vedic marriage, and he speaks of that, what is called Aniloma and Pratiloma. These are concepts which determine who is fit to marry whom, based on this whole one ashram principle. That there can be matching people, but also quite mismatches, which are not recommended or not allowed. So there's a whole understanding, a whole kind of scientific approach on whom you put together, depends on their, of course, compatibility, you would say nowadays, and what basis they have. One reason why also nowadays often relationships don't work, because the people who come together in the first place are not compatible, or not really, they can't really work on so many levels together. But that's another story. That others are more expert in these details, how to determine who is. Maybe you also know about astrology. Perhaps there's some things to be said on in this regard. Yes, so the relationship becomes powerful if there's higher purpose, if there's commitment to spiritual practice. And in 7.11.28, there was also yesterday, Krishna Prabhupada quoted that. The verse says, a chaste woman should not be greedy, but satisfied in all circumstances. She must be very expert in handling household affairs, and she should be fully conversant with religious principles. She should speak pleasingly and truthfully, and should be very careful and always clean and pure. Thus a chaste woman should engage with affection to serve a husband who is not fallen. And Srila Prabhupada, particularly in the purport, also addresses, of course, the qualification of the men, because here in the verses we hear a lot of expectation on the women. There's, of course, a lot of expectation on the men as well. Nothing less than being a pure devotee. That's what the purpose will say. It said here, thus a chaste woman is not advised to agree to serve, a fallen husband is one who is addicted to the four principles of sinful activity, namely illicit sex, meat eating, gambling, and intoxication. Specifically, if one is not a soul surrendered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is understood to be contaminated. Thus, a chaste woman is advised not to agree to serve such a husband. It is not that a chaste woman should be like a slave, while a husband is a Naradama, the lowest of men. Although the duties of a woman are different from those of a man, a chaste woman is not meant to serve a fallen husband. If her husband is fallen, it is recommended that she gives up his association. And here a bit further, the conclusion is that a husband should be a pure Vaishnava and that a woman should be a chaste wife with all the symptoms described in this regard. Then both of them will be happy and make spiritual progress in Krishna consciousness. Quite some expectations. And we find on both sides. It's big on both sides, we must see that. And also clear, I mean, this purport could be interpreted as divorce is fine, but this actually doesn't mean that. Srila Prabhupada in many places says divorce should be abolished. He was completely against that concept. It's more about living separate. Also the purpose then says the idea that women should not marry again, because this is like equivalent, according to the Vedic version, to prostitution. Also quite a strong statement, probably this gives rise to a lot of conflict and conversation, but that's what the purport says, Srila Prabhupada says, based on Shastra. So we see like it's not a thing to, how to say, take lightly relationships, and at the same time it's something, it's strongly, how to say, it's instructed to us. This is how one should endeavor or try to live his life. And the austerities that come with it are also interesting, because here in the purport in the Bhagavatam shloka, Srila Prabhupada describes what should a woman do if the man takes sannyas, and okay, she should like return home, be nothing less than a saintly woman, which is, I don't know what you think by the term saintly. When always holy and saintly, for me there's always something there, and I always have difficulties when there's name, His Grace, Keshava, and I think, no, please, no grace. It's like, for me it's like, I feel like, oh my God, this is like a pedestal I'm not fit to sit on, kind of. And yeah, so, but maybe the terms can also be looked a bit in a relative sense, but still I feel like it's a lot of expectation also on the husband and so on. But something else I wanted to say, actually, no, I forgot it. One interesting aspect to notice that there's only two, usually suicide is not sanctioned in Vedic scriptures. Doesn't go, it's considered sinful if you destroy your body. But two types of suicide are permitted, so to speak. One is the very elevated level of love of God, where you can't tolerate the separation of Krishna anymore, and your body is just like a burden, obstacle in your relationship to Krishna. You're allowed to give it up. So that's a very high platform. And another is for a wife, if the husband dies, and she can enter the, how does this fire is called? Funeral fire, what is it?
Funeral pyre.
Funeral pyre, this kind of, when the husband is burned. If you think of that, I mean, for me this gave me quite some shock always, I don't know, I never witnessed, I hope I never have to witness, that someone burns alive. Right? It's probably a very gruesome scene. But it was common. It is also got forbidden at some point in India that a woman enters this fire when the husband dies, because she can't bear the separation and sees like there's no point for me living without him. So consider also what bond must be there, like that you're willing to do that. And we see it in the Mahabharata. There was Madri and Kunti, the two wives of King Pandu, and actually both were eager to go with Pandu. So, and then Kunti there was quite a source of frustration for her. She anyway was not so happy with how Maharaj Pandu was asking her to use the boon she got from Durvasa Muni in order to receive the demigods so that they get children. because she felt Madhuri tricked her. She, like one by one, the woman, she got one son after the other, and Madhuri just like invoked Ashwini Kumaras and got twins. She thought, now she has 2 children, I have 3, like, and she felt it was quite some competition. But then it turned again the other way when they were arguing about who is going with Pandu. Madhuri used the argument, listen, you have 3 sons, I have 2. You got more responsibility to take care of, and Kunti agreed to it, but I guess she was not happy. Or like she was not happy about it. And Madhuri was willing to just enter the fire. And I think it's quite impressive, you know, if a woman is willing to do that. It became a custom in India that was what a crime, because women were pushed or forced to follow their husbands, even if they didn't want to, in this way, which is hellish. So, but just as a side note, like how, in regards to this relationship concept that is presented to us in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the second part of the purport, the second paragraph, speaks of Vishnu Priya Devi, the wife of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and the type of austerity she performed, which is, you recall what she did? Right? Chanting rounds, and for each round collecting a piece of grain. Let's assume she has this 108 pearls as we have, and you know what it takes sometimes, okay, 16 rounds, maybe 32 rounds. Even if you do that, how much is like 16 or 32 grains of rice, you know, kind of fills a little spot on your hand. And said that's was cooked and being accepted as prasadam. So it's practically like you don't eat. You just have a little kind of something, your body gets the idea, oh, there's some intake, and you get that. So this level of austerity is amazing, and probably most of us, we wouldn't be able to do that. But interestingly, the principle of austerity is to gradually and sometimes quite drastically reduce any physical or mental needs up to the point where you can let go of them. Because our initial teaching of the Bhagavad Gita is we are the spirit soul, and the spirit soul actually maintains the body. But being identified with mind and body, we think the needs of the mind and body are our needs. And it requires a gradual process of transformation through also tapasya, that we can get to this level and understand, aha, it's not the food that maintains me. It's the spirit soul that actually by its energy maintains the body, and if the soul leaves, it's gone. But this is a powerful mechanism of how the consciousness is absorbed in matter, and then thinks, I'm identical with the conditions matter has in terms of a body, mentally as physically. So therefore also sometimes the mind is so powerful, makes people die by certain ideas they have. Like an idea can literally kill you if it kind of becomes an obsessive thought. That people, for example, die by suffocating or whatever, simply because they really think that. It can be some on the other hand, a thought can be so powerful that a woman's manifests all the symptoms of pregnancy, although she isn't pregnant. Because the mind has this idea, this is, and manifests that within the body. So the pasya is meant to make us capable to let go of bodily needs. And I would like to read also one quote to Prabhupada at the end of the purport, relates or addresses the point that Queen Archie was very frail and thin because they didn't eat much. And that means usually people who are dedicated to tapasya are rather thin. Maybe depending on the metabolism, your body might have a certain constitution, that doesn't allow you to be very thin. You still might look kind of chubby, but that's maybe exceptions. And he writes here, becoming fat is not a very good qualification in spiritual life, because a person who is engaged in spiritual life must reduce the comforts of the body, namely eating, sleeping, and mating, to a minimum. Now, Queen Archie became very thin, and living in the forest according to regular principles, she was not unhappy. So this type of tapasya Queen Archie performed is certainly not suitable for us. I think it's clear, no one will enter a forest at some point and live like that. It's not what we require. But Srila Prabhupada makes clear what kind of tapasya he expects from those who are in the movement for Krishna consciousness. And he says here, it's in the purport of the Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th canto, chapter 28, text 35 to 36. We can definitely see that to advance in Krishna consciousness, one must control his bodily weight. If one becomes too fat, it is to be assumed that he is not advancing spiritually. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur severely criticized his fat disciples. The idea is that one who intends to advance in Krishna consciousness must not eat very much. So eating also to a minimum. That's, I think, in our movement a challenge. Just look at what is being cooked every day, or like the festivals, and how much, also what we eat in terms of sugar, milk, and like there's so many fats. So one is quite, it's quite a challenge to really eat only as much as necessary. There's also an interesting concept, necessity depends on physical constitution. Not everyone has the same, we cannot say what is necessity for me is necessity for you, in terms of you might need different things. But we can understand there is a level where we say that's necessary, and all above that it's additional enjoyment. And how do we figure out what is really necessary? By actually challenging ourselves with some tapasyas that make us realize with how less we can actually go. I remember also my mother said, like, it was once about quitting coffee, because she likes to drink coffee, but also feels the side effects of it, of long-term coffee use. But then said, oh yeah, once I had a day without coffee, and then I got a headache, and then I went back to drinking coffee, and I said, well, yeah, it's called, how say these symptoms, it's called, how say, an Entzugssymptom, how you say that in English? Withdrawal symptoms. Well, yeah, that's what happens when you stop it. It's not an indication, oh, it's wrong. No, it's about, you're supposed to tolerate it and then go on, and then you can let go of it. So voluntarily accepting inconvenience, that's what your Prabhupada says. So if you fast, for example, yeah, of course your body's hungry, you might feel weak for a bit, you might have a headache, your mood might be affected, you feel like, because I'm hungry. But this is to be tolerated, and you can notice, you can make the experience. Many of you have fasted many times. You probably know, like at some point, there's a shift, where your body even feels, I don't need more. And the next day, when you break fast and you eat something, and usually you would eat such a plate, and after half a plate you feel, I had enough, right? So you can understand, like, needing, we might be very surprised what we actually need, in terms of how little this might be, and how much we actually want. And there's also, it's not only a matter of practicing discipline, by fasting, for example, it's also a matter of understanding, why do I, for example, eat or sleep or do all these things? Because we don't only eat because we are hungry. You can eat because you're frustrated, or you can, there's so-called emotional eating, emotional eaters. So it's not about that you just have to taste things. No, you feel something in your mind is bothering. Or sleeping. It's not only that you sleep because your body is tired. You can also sleep means I get a break off, or like dealing with frustration or boredom and whatever. So all these things, eating, sleeping, mating, defending, and so on, can have secondary purposes. And if you want to control them, we must be also aware, okay, what makes me do the unnecessary eating, the unnecessary sleeping, the unnecessary mating, the unnecessary defending, and so on. That's something I guess we can have in mind. And Srila Prabhupada writes further in the purport, one should instead eat only prasad and no more than required. And you might remember the nectar of instruction, starting Srila Prabhupada in the introduction says, I have it right here. In all spiritual affairs, one's first duty is to control his mind and senses. Unless one controls his mind and senses, one cannot make any advancement in spiritual life. Then the first shloka saying, Vacho vegam, manasa krodha vegam, jiva vegam, udarupashta vegam, vigan vegam. Vigan jivesha heta dhiraha, sarvam apivam pritibim sashishyat. And also there, like in the purport, quite a few lines, or quite a text is dedicated to how one, even also in regards to prasadam, should be very careful not to, in the name of spiritual activity, just satisfy his tongue. Would not be tempted to think, oh, I cook all this nice prasadam for Krishna, but then I also eat a lot. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is advising, don't eat sumptuous food or like very delicious food, and don't dress, vainly, kind of, or like, you know. So this way we are advised to be careful not to do that. And the tapasya that is very much emphasized for Srila Prabhupada in different ways that is doable for us is, for example, the Ekadashi vow, the Ekadashi Vrata. Here in a lecture on the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 12th chapter, text 19 from 1975 in Dallas, Srila Prabhupada says, but if you want to realize God, as it is said here, tapaseva, only by tapasya, only by penance one can realize, otherwise not. Otherwise it is not possible. Therefore this word is used, tapaseva, tapasa eva, only by tapasya. There is no other means. So obviously there's a lot of emphasis on tapasya. It makes this point very clear. Tapaseva param. Param means the supreme. If you want to realize the supreme, the absolute, then you must agree to a certain type of tapasya. Otherwise it is not possible. The preliminary little tapasya, just like Ekadashi, that is also one of these items of the tapasya. Actually, on the Ekadashi days, we shall not take any food, even drink water. But in our societies, we are not doing so much strictly. We say, Ekadashi, you don't take food grains. Take little fruit, milk. This is tapasya. So we cannot execute this tapasya? Question. So if we are not prepared to undertake even this very, very easily executable tapasya, then how can we expect go back to home, back to Godhead? No, that is not possible. Therefore here it is said, tapaseva, tapasa eva. Eva means certainly, you have to. Prabhupada says. So in the Ekadashi, is something originally you supposed not to eat at all. I mean, I tried sometimes. I mean, often it works. Sometimes to drink only water over the day. But now I do it reducing it in that way, saying I don't eat breakfast, don't eat lunch, just once in the evening, something over the day, some liquid, and it's always a good experience because what I also every time you realize, you feel a certain sense of empowerment if you can resist the urge of the body, of the belly, of the tongue. And it's kind of powerful. It gives you a sense of ability also. You know, if you have this discipline, it works. I can do it. I'm more than my body, so to speak. I don't have to. Well, there's this one advertisement. I don't know from whom it comes, and it was sometimes also on the train station. And the advertisement was "Obey your body." I don't know, some kind of cosmetic stuff. I think something like. Yves Rocher, I don't know, but kind of struck me like this, obey your body. He's like, no, don't. Don't obey your body. Make your body obey to you, to pasya. So, yes, these were a few things I wanted to address. So I don't know if you have time for another question or comment.
I didn't inform you yet, but with this change in timing, we decided that it will at 8:30.
Yes.
Including question answer will finish, and then if there's questions, they can also be asked privately.
Alright.
But since I didn't tell you before, I don't think I have the right to cut you down.
Okay. So shall we see if there are any comments or questions?
It's up to you.
Then.
Tapasya means austerity. Thank you.
I was just reflecting on what you mentioned about Ekadashi and also about
relationships. And first about Ekadashi, recently I heard a lecture from His Holiness Bhakti Swami Maharaj where he described the importance of Ekadashi and how Ekadashi is the mother and Bhakti is Ekadashi is like a pregnant woman and Bhakti is the daughter. So that's how important it is to observe Ekadashi nicely. And it comes from a song of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And he said that how you should observe full fast, if not then at least until 12, if not then only fruits, if not. So it's quite, thank you for pointing it out, because sometimes it's becomes like a feast day for us also. So it's so nice to also remember how strictly we have to observe Ekadashi and how important it is.
Yes, because actually it's not fasting if you just replace the items and the quantity remains the same. Then it's just like, you can also say, yeah, I fast for meat every day, so I don't eat meat. But it's not the idea. Fasting means you reduce less and try to go with less.
Thank you. And also about relationships, I was just thinking, just something I thought was quite nice, which I recently encountered. I was in this seminar with Ratna Bhushan organized by CVS. And he was really speaking about, because I was reflecting as he was speaking, this connotation is very much reflected, I think, in this term servant leadership. I think Jayapataka Kumar coined it, I don't know, but this is such a nice term, servant leadership. And that's something we can follow in relationships also, that you lead but you're also like a servant. So it could be like a very reciprocal relationship. And then Ratnabhushan Prabhu was pointing out, like he was saying, to really analyze ourselves and how to separate our existence with our mind and our bodily needs and demands. And he said something very nice, which I'm trying to do, to really write down our needs in relationships. And we might act in a certain way, we might have certain expectations. So to really write down our needs, and like he gave a whole list of what we can write down. And I thought it's also nice for personal practice to really observe why we act in a certain way and our own needs, and that's why we act in the relationships in a certain way.
Yes. Yeah, we can't give up artificially needs. It's like a gradual thing. Alright. Granta Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Keshava Madhava ki jai.
I need to remember that now.
Yeah.
Ja, ich würde denken, pünktlich halb.
Ja, das ist wie wir es gefunden haben, stand. Eigentlich wäre früher noch immer Viertel vor, aber die meisten sind nicht da. Und jetzt, wo wir eine Viertelstunde zurück sind,
Ja.
es ist halt so.
Ist auch gut, kürzer ist oft effektiver.
Ja, wir haben es auch gefunden, oft zieht sie sich einfach raus. Und es ist oft ein Gespräch, oder wo einfach nicht kurz bedürftig sind. Viele sagen, aber wir sagen auch, wenn Sannyasi oder